I never thought a restaurant receipt could shatter everything I believed about my life. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I was folding towels, half watching a cooking show in the background, thinking about whether we had enough coffee for the week. Just a normal day in our house in Portland. But then I saw it, tucked into Nathan's jacket pocket. A receipt from a fancy place downtown, the kind of place we only went for anniversaries. 2 entrees, a dessert to share, 2 glasses of wine. It was dated last Thursday. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a work dinner, maybe he went with a client. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But it didn't feel right. There'd been signs I just didn't want to see them. The emotional distance, the sudden interest in his appearance. The way he'd started sleeping with his phone under his pillow. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I even felt guilty for snooping. But deep down, I knew something was off. So I waited. I didn't say anything right away. I watched him, that night, how easily he smiled, how casually he asked about my day. I listened for a crack in his voice, some hint of guilt. There was nothing. And that made it worse. It wasn't just the possibility that he was lying. It was how well he was doing it. I'm not dramatic. I'm not someone who jumps to conclusions. But something in my gut told me to dig. I didn't realize then that I was standing on the edge of everything falling apart. That little piece of paper wasn't just a receipt. It was the thread that would unravel everything. I spent the whole night replaying things in my head. Dinners we'd had, conversations that didn't quite make sense. Moments I chalked up to stress or tiredness. I started thinking about the last few months, how we'd become roommates more than anything else. It all came rushing in like a wave I'd been holding back. That receipt, it was my proof, my confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts weren't lying. Looking back, there were so many little moments I ignored. But this one, I couldn't shake it. I had to know the truth. And I was not ready for what I'd find. Everything was about to change, whether I wanted it to or not. The next few days, I became a quiet observer in my own marriage. I didn't confront him right away. I needed more than a gut feeling. I started noticing patterns. He'd leave the house at odd hours, sometimes claiming it was work-related, other times not even offering a reason. His texts became cryptic. He was constantly on edge, defensive over nothing. The man I'd built a life with suddenly felt like a stranger sharing my roof. One evening, he came home smelling like a perfume I didn't wear. It wasn't just the scent, it was the way he avoided eye contact, rushed to the shower without even saying hello. I remember standing there, frozen, holding a spatula in one hand and watching him pass me like I was invisible. That's when I knew I wasn't imagining it. I decided to look through his messages. I never wanted to be that person, but I had to protect myself. What I found made my stomach turn. A message from Carla. Last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you. I read it 3 times. My hands were shaking. Carla, his cousin's wife, family, someone we'd spent holidays with, someone I'd cooked for, laughed with. That betrayal cut deeper than I knew was possible. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at me and said, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." As if that made it better. I waited for him to say sorry, to show some sign of regret, but all I got was silence, then blame. He said I'd grown cold, that he felt disconnected, like it was my fault he crossed that line. The worst part? His mother defended him. She called me, said I'd become distant and too focused on myself. I couldn't believe it. I was the one keeping everything together while he played house with someone else. I hung up and sat in the dark for hours, trying to make sense of it all. But there was no logic, just hurt. Deep, hollow, consuming hurt. I felt like I was shrinking, like my whole life had been made up, and I was the only one who hadn't gotten the memo. And I knew I couldn't stay. I had to leave before I lost more than just my marriage. I had to leave before I lost myself. The day after I confronted Nathan, I packed a bag. I didn't have a plan, but I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Every room felt like a lie. The kitchen where we used to cook together, Our bedroom that suddenly felt like someone else's space, it was all tainted. I moved mechanically, stuffing clothes into a duffel, grabbing my charger, my toothbrush. He didn't try to stop me. He just stood there, watching. Not with regret, not with sadness, just blankness. Before I walked out the door, I got a call from his mom. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even sound surprised. Instead, she sighed and said, "I always knew you'd make things difficult. You're not exactly warm, Julia." I almost laughed. That was her takeaway? That I wasn't warm enough? As if my lack of small talk at family dinners somehow justified everything her son had done. I hung up on her mid-sentence. That was the moment I realized I was alone in this. Driving away from that house was surreal. I kept waiting for the pain to crash over me, but all I felt was numb. I ended up in a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place you don't notice until you need somewhere to disappear. The room was tiny and smelled faintly like bleach and cigarettes, but it was quiet. And for the first time in days, I could breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for hours. No TV, no phone, just silence. I didn't cry. Right away, I felt detached, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. My world had split in two, before the receipt and after. I didn't even know who I was in this new version. What broke me, finally, was remembering how many times I defended him. To friends, to family, to myself. How often I'd made excuses for his coldness, thinking he was just tired or stressed. But he wasn't. He was lying. And I'd been the fool trying to hold everything together while he built something else behind my back. That truth hit harder than I expected. And in that little motel room, I finally let myself break. No more pretending. No more holding it together for someone who never valued it in the first place. 2 days after I checked into the motel, I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart jumped. I looked through the peephole, and there she was, Carla. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there, unsure if I was imagining things, but then she knocked again, softer this time. I opened it, just a crack. She smiled. Not nervously, not apologetically, just like she was trying to charm me. "Can we talk?" she said. I didn't want to, but curiosity got the better of me. I let her in. She sat on the edge of the bed like she'd done nothing wrong. She talked first, said she was so sorry I had to find out this way. Not sorry for what she did. Sorry. I found out. There's a difference, and I felt it in her voice. She said things were complicated, that she and Nathan hadn't meant to hurt anyone, that it just happened. I wanted to scream. Affairs don't just happen. You don't trip and fall into someone's bed. It's a choice, over and over again. Then she got emotional, started crying, talking about how Nathan made her feel seen, how lonely she'd felt in her marriage. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to get sympathy. From me. The woman she betrayed. She kept saying, "You don't know what it's like." As if I was supposed to feel bad for her. As if I hadn't just lost my home, my trust, my future. That was the moment it all clicked. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to rewrite the story, to paint herself as a victim, to make sure I didn't expose her for what she really was. I saw it in her eyes. She was calculating, rehearsed. Her tears were weapons, not regrets. I stood up, told her to leave. She tried to stall, but I wasn't playing along. I told her I saw through it all. That whatever story she wanted to tell herself, I wasn't buying it. She looked stunned for a second, then just nodded and walked out. And as soon as the door clicked shut behind her, I locked it and sat back down on the bed, shaking. Not from fear. From clarity. That conversation didn't rattle me. It cleared the fog. It showed me exactly who she was and who I was done being. After Carla left, the silence in that motel room felt heavier. It was the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. Not peaceful, just still. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't reach for my phone. I just sat there and let the quiet spread, For the first time in what felt like years, I gave myself permission to feel everything. I thought I'd cry, but I didn't. Not at first. Instead, my mind wandered. To the early days with Nathan, to moments when we were happy, or at least when I thought we were. I replayed old vacations, dinners with friends, nights spent planning our future. Were those memories real? Or just performances I didn't know I was part of? Time moved strangely in that room. Hours passed without me noticing. I'd get up, pace the floor, sit back down. Sometimes I'd just stare at the ceiling, trying to make sense of how my life had flipped inside out. The betrayal wasn't just about cheating. It was about how invisible I'd become, how easily he had rewritten our story without me, and how I had played along without even realizing it. I thought about calling someone. Maya came to mind. My coworker who always checked in, who once told me she had a bad feeling about Nathan. But I wasn't ready to talk yet. I didn't want to hear anyone else's voice. I needed to find my own first. In the quiet, I started to feel something unfamiliar. Space. A kind of mental room I hadn't had in years. There were no expectations, no compromises, no pretending everything was fine. Just me, raw and hurting, but honest. And strangely, that honesty was comforting. It was something to hold on to, something that felt more solid than anything I'd had with him in a long time. Eventually, the tears did come. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just a steady stream I didn't bother wiping away. I sat on the floor and cried for the version of me that had tried so hard, for the trust I'd given freely, for the future I'd lost. But even through the heartbreak, I could feel something else beginning. Something small and still too faint to name. But it was there. The start of a different story. One where I didn't have to disappear to keep the peace. One where I finally mattered. To myself, without question. A few days passed, and I still hadn't reached out to anyone. But I couldn't stop thinking about Leo, Carla's husband. I wondered if he knew, if he'd seen the same cracks I had. Eventually, I worked up the nerve and sent him a message. Just a simple line. "Can we talk?" He replied almost immediately, told me to call whenever I was ready. I dialed his number with trembling hands. When he picked up, his voice was calm. Too calm. Like someone who'd already been through the fire and walked out the other side. I barely got the words out before he said, "Yeah, I know." Just like that. No hesitation, no disbelief, just confirmation. Leo told me he'd known for a while. He'd suspected for months, but didn't have proof until recently. He said Carla had slipped up, left her phone unattended. He found messages and not just texts, voice notes, photos. Then he told me something that made my stomach drop. He had security cameras at their house. Footage, clear as day. He didn't sound angry, not even bitter, just resolved. He said he didn't confront her at first. He wanted to be sure. He wanted to understand the full picture before making a move. That's who Leo is, methodical, controlled, the opposite of chaos. While I was falling apart in a motel room, he'd been building a quiet case. I asked him why he hadn't told anyone. He said, "I needed the timing to be right." He wasn't just planning to confront them. He was planning to expose them. Not out of revenge, but out of principle, out of truth. He said, "They wanted to humiliate us quietly, so I'm going to tell the truth loudly." We stayed on the phone for a long time. There was a strange comfort in talking to someone who knew the same kind of pain, someone who wasn't going to minimize it or tell me to forgive and forget. Leo didn't try to make me feel better. He just made me feel less alone. When we hung up, I sat there staring at my phone. Everything felt different, not fixed, but different. Because now I wasn't just surviving, I had the truth. And so did someone else. And knowing that gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks. Solid ground. A sense that I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't the only one who saw it. It was a Tuesday morning when Leo pulled the trigger. He didn't give me a heads up. He didn't need to. I woke up to 23 missed messages and a dozen group chats going off like firecrackers. My heart raced before I even opened them, and then I saw it, the video. blurry but clear enough. Nathan and Carla, kissing in Leo and Carla's living room, laughing, touching, like they didn't have families, like nothing mattered. Leo had sent the footage to everyone, their extended family group chats, mutual friends, even Carla's siblings. No explanation, just the video. Letting the truth speak for itself. And it did. Loudly. People were stunned, angry, embarrassed. Within hours, I was getting texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were supportive, others were awkward. A few were clearly fishing for drama. I ignored most of them. I didn't owe anyone a performance or any kind of reaction, but watching the fallout was surreal. Nathan's relatives, who once doted on Carla, were suddenly silent. A couple of them even messaged me with half-hearted apologies. One aunt said, "She never trusted Carla's smile." I rolled my eyes at that. Where were those instincts when I needed them? It was amazing how quickly people rewrote their memories to feel better about themselves. Nathan, predictably, tried damage control. He sent out a long, rambling message about how the situation was more complicated than it looked, and that he deeply regretted the pain caused. No direct apology to me, just vague statements designed to soften the blow, but no one was buying it. Not after that video. The proof was too loud, too real. Carla went quiet, completely. Not a single word from her. Leo told me later she tried to convince him to lie, to say it was old footage taken out of context, but he wasn't having it. His quiet fury was louder than any tantrum. And me? I stayed silent. I watched it all unfold from my motel room, drinking cheap coffee and scrolling through the chaos. It was strange, almost cinematic. But this wasn't revenge. It wasn't satisfaction. It was just exposure. The truth finally had air, and as painful as it was, it felt clean, like disinfecting a wound. It stings, but it also means healing has started. The pretending was over. The denial, the gaslighting, it ended with that video. And in that ending, something new could finally begin. On my own The fallout didn't stop with the family chats. Word spread quickly, and it wasn't long before it reached Nathan's job. He worked in a tight-knit office, the kind where everyone knows everyone's business. Apparently, one of his coworkers was in one of the extended family groups. Within a week, he was asked to take a leave of absence. Then he was let go. He called me the day after he lost his job. I didn't pick up, so he left a voicemail. His voice cracked as he said he'd made a mistake and that everything was falling apart. For a second, I felt a flicker of something. Maybe guilt, maybe pity. But it vanished as quickly as it came. He hadn't called to apologize. He called because the consequences finally landed at his feet, and he didn't know what to do without someone cleaning up after him. Over the next few days, he tried again. Texted me long paragraphs about how he'd been confused, how he still cared, how he wanted to meet. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. He wasn't reaching out to take responsibility. He was reaching out to be rescued. And I was done playing the lifeline. He was looking for comfort. I had none to give him anymore. Then came the letter. Handwritten. Delivered to Maya's place, where I'd moved temporarily. It was thick with emotion, the kind that tries too hard. He said he missed us, that he never stopped loving me, that he made a horrible mistake. He even tried to shift the blame again, saying things spiraled because we hadn't connected in months. That's when I knew he hadn't changed. He still didn't get it. I didn't write back. I didn't call. I let the silence be my answer. Maya asked me once if I felt satisfied seeing him lose so much. But I didn't. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to see him broken. I just wanted to be free. Free from guilt, from doubt, from the years I spent bending to make things work. Free from the pressure to forgive someone who never even asked for it. Watching someone finally face the consequences of their own actions is strange. It's not gratifying. It's sobering. It reminds you that truth has weight, and when it finally lands, it doesn't need fanfare. It just settles. Quietly, firmly, permanently. And in that silence, I found peace. Not because he suffered, but because I stopped. Moving in with Maya wasn't part of the plan. But plans had stopped mattering weeks ago. She had a spare room, a strong sense of boundaries, and a quiet way of showing support that didn't ask for anything in return. I didn't need advice. I didn't want pep talks. I just needed space to breathe, and Maya gave me that without question. The first few days were weird. Not bad, just unfamiliar. There was a kind of stillness in her apartment that felt foreign after the chaos I'd been living in. I started waking up early again, not because I had to, but because I could. I'd make coffee, sit on her balcony, and let my thoughts drift. It was the first time I'd felt unobserved in years. No one to perform for, no one to manage, just me, figuring out what peace even looked like. I started doing small things, updating my resume, organizing my finances, making lists of what I'd need for a new place. At first, it felt like pretending, going through motions just to stay busy. But slowly, it started to feel real. Like maybe there was something on the other side of all this. Something mine. Maya never pushed, but she always listened. One night, over takeout, she asked if I'd considered seeing someone, a therapist. I shrugged. Said maybe. Truthfully, I hadn't let myself think that far ahead. But the idea stuck with me. Not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to make sense of what I'd just survived. I wanted to understand the patterns, the ways. I'd made myself small to keep the peace. A few weeks in, I finalized the paperwork for the separation. No drama, no courtroom showdown. Just signatures, notarizations, and the quiet end of a shared name. I didn't cry. I didn't even hesitate. It felt like closing a chapter that had already ended a long time ago. And this time, I didn't look back. One morning, I found a small apartment listed nearby. Nothing fancy, just clean and light-filled. I applied, got approved. When I got the call, I didn't jump or cheer. I just smiled. It felt quiet, like everything else had. But this quiet felt different. This was mine, my space, my choice. And that, more than anything, felt like a beginning, not an escape, a return to myself. A month after moving into my new apartment, something unexpected popped up in my inbox, a link from a friend. The subject line just said, "Have you seen this?" I clicked it, and there it was. Carla's GoFundMe. She'd launched a public campaign asking for donations to get back on her feet after the scandal destroyed her life. She wrote about being abandoned, shamed, harassed. Not once did she mention what actually happened. No accountability, no apology. Just spin. A carefully crafted sob story designed to paint her as the victim of some giant misunderstanding. I stared at the page in disbelief. She was asking strangers to fund her recovery from consequences she caused. There were photos. Sad, makeup-free selfies. A picture of her holding her dog. The comments were full of sympathy. People saying she was brave and deserved a second chance. I felt sick. I didn't want to respond. I really didn't. But something about it, about her rewriting the story again, got under my skin. It wasn't just the dishonesty. It was the audacity. So I did something I never thought I would. I wrote everything down. Not in anger, not in revenge, just the truth. I started typing the timeline, the messages, the video, how I found out what she said to me at the motel. I included none of her name, none of Nathan's, just facts. A story. My story. I posted it anonymously on a platform for relationship survivors. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but it took off. People read it, shared it, commented, and most importantly, they believed it. Because it rang true. Because it was true. And soon enough, her GoFundMe started getting different kinds of attention. The kind where people asked questions, connected dots. One comment linked directly to my post. Another asked, "Is this the same Carla from that thread?" Donations slowed, then stopped. Eventually, she closed the page without explanation. No update, no accountability, just silence. I didn't gloat. I didn't watch it crumble. I just shut my laptop and sat with the feeling. Not pride, not victory, just peace. Quiet, settled peace. Because for once, I hadn't been erased. I hadn't been rewritten. My story was out there, in my words, on my terms. And that was enough. I didn't need applause. I just needed truth. And finally, I had it. It felt like oxygen. Weeks passed. Life grew quieter, more normal. I started building routines. Groceries on Sunday, walks in the evening, watering a little plant I bought on a whim. There were still moments when it hit me, the enormity of what had happened. But the edge had dulled. The pain had formed now. And somehow that made it easier to carry. Then, one afternoon, an envelope arrived. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Carla. I stared at it for a while, debated throwing it out. But curiosity won. Inside was a single-page letter. Long-winded, defensive. She didn't say she was sorry, not really. She said she'd been misunderstood, that people had turned on her unfairly. She referenced the anonymous post, called it one-sided, said, "I had ruined her life by telling the internet half the truth." She ended it with, "I hope one day you'll be honest with yourself about your part in this." I read it twice, not because I was confused, but because I couldn't believe the sheer lack of awareness. Even now, after everything, she was still trying to make herself the victim, still trying to pull me into the mud with her. But I didn't bite. I folded the letter neatly and put it in a drawer, not out of sentiment, but to remind myself of the journey, of how far I'd come from the woman who once second-guessed her own reality, who folded towels while her marriage unraveled behind. Her back. That letter didn't hurt me, it clarified everything. Carla hadn't changed. Nathan probably hadn't either. But I had. And that was enough. In the end, this wasn't about betrayal. It wasn't about revenge. It was about voice. About choosing not to disappear just because someone else needed a scapegoat. It was about saying, "This happened, and I lived through it. I still have bad days. I still flinch at certain memories, but I don't live there anymore. I moved out. Literally, emotionally, spiritually. And in doing so, I gave myself back what they tried to erase." If you're watching this and you've ever doubted your version of the story, don't. You get to own your truth. And if it helps someone else, even better. But mostly, let it help you, like it helped me. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you for listening.